Alyx's Toolkit. Alyx's multi-tool is incredibly useful for letting us use her as a key. Often, we needed to keep the player from moving forward until we were ready, and her multi-tool allowed her to deliver dialogue while unlocking the way ahead. We probably relied on it a bit too much, but it was hard to resist. There was always a trade-off. Using Alyx to gate a room instead of creating a custom solution saved time that we could spend on other parts of the game, often more critical ones.
Alyx as companion. This section became an unintentional prototype for what Episode 1 would eventually feature. Alyx as a companion, moving smoothly along a path that blends dynamic combat with scripted choreography. We didn't yet have a clear model for how she would fit alongside the player in these scenarios, but even this brief section taught us a lot, despite not having enough time to iterate on it.
Eli in Pod Choreography. We wrote and recorded dialogue for the scene while still building out Nova Prospect. At that stage, we knew Alyx and Gordon would teleport out of the prison, but none of the specifics had been worked out, so the dialogue needed to be broad enough to fit whatever we ultimately built. This led us to focus less on the player's actions and more on Alyx's vulnerability and her connection to her father. We hoped the emotion would carry the scene more than the narrative itself. Ultimately, we're aiming for the player to care about these characters and want to prioritize what's important to Alyx.
Vent. You probably know this, but if there's a vent, there has to be a head crab in it. We don't make these rules. They, like the vents themselves, come straight from the top.
Look targets. One of the key tools in our design toolkit is the look target, an invisible point in space that activates when the player looks at it. Designers can specify how accurately the player has to look at it, the duration of the look, and other conditions. Once activated, the look target triggers various events in the game. For example, Alyx might wait for the player to look at her before delivering a line of dialogue. A spectacle might begin only when it's in view, or a combine dropship might fly over when the player is looking in its general direction. Once we implemented look targets, designers found endless ways to use them to make gameplay feel more reliable for players, especially since some move at very different speeds or in difficult-to-predict ways.
Grenade puzzle. This small puzzle often caused players to get stuck during playtests because the unlimited grenade box was placed a bit behind them on their path. By this point in the game, players have fully learned to associate unlimited ammo boxes with puzzle solutions. So if a grenade box were here, they'd immediately know they needed a grenade to solve it. We wanted them to have to think a little first. Eventually, we added a subtle hint by making grenades visible on the desk through a window, just to remind players they're available. They also helped uncover a bug in a playtest when a player approached to look more closely and ended up collecting the grenade through the glass.
Mossman's Betrayal. Our original plan for Judith Mossman's arc was for her to betray the player around this point. But by the time we reached the scene, having developed other parts of the game, we felt she was more likely just trying to protect Eli. We envisioned her reconsidering, realizing she couldn't actually betray Gordon. We had ideas to clarify this shift later, but ultimately we never finished her arc. We liked the ambiguity in Mossman, but players didn't seem to. They almost universally hated her. That might be a success, though. We worked hard to build the player's affinity for Alyx, and Alyx wasn't exactly a fan of Judith either.
Turret training exit. This pile of trash, along with the cluttered descent down the stairs, is designed to discourage players from bringing a turret with them. While it wouldn't break anything if they did, we wanted to make it less likely. Making it inconvenient to keep the turret isn't an ideal design strategy, but it was better than nothing. Many playtesters eventually gave up and tossed the turret aside once they felt the game was trying to tell them something.
Final turret arena. When building the arc of a gameplay element, like allied turret usage, we often build a prototype that represents the arc's endpoint first. We iterate on that prototype until the playtests show that it works. Then we work backward, adding preceding scenarios to introduce the element and build player skill. This approach ensures the final arc is engaging before we invest substantial time. It also means that, by the time we create training scenarios, we've observed enough playtests to know which skills need guidance and which players will grasp naturally. The final turret scenario was our goal, emphasizing the player's defense against enemies from multiple directions. requiring dynamic turret placement and recovery.
Allied turrets balancing. Balancing this fight around the Allied turrets was challenging. The turrets are the novel element here, so if players ignore them, the gameplay feels redundant, because so much of it is similar to what's come before. We wanted to require turret usage and reward strategic placement, but it was highly binary. Perfect placement made a fight easy, while poor placement made it very difficult. Tuning and custom soldier AI logic helped. Soldiers became better at toppling turrets by throwing grenades or flanking to knock them down. These changes made the fight less about a perfect setup and more about actively maintaining turrets, as any setup will be disrupted at some point. Playtests vary widely, with some players finding it too hard and others calling it their favorite fight. Running out of time, we ultimately made it a bit easier and shipped it, though we were unsatisfied with the final balance.
Flares. This section is a nice counterpoint to the previous turret segment in terms of production and cost and iteration. Built very late, it came together quickly as the AI for Alyx and the Combine Soldier was already mature. We liked the darkness and flares and filed it away as something to explore further. Later, we revisited it when planning the dark sections in Episode 1.
There she is. Leave it talking to me, Gordon.
Meeting Mossman. Reuniting the player and Alyx with Mossman after the betrayal scene was tricky. As many players felt, they should shoot Mossman on sight. We couldn't allow this, as we didn't have time to develop alternate story branches. However, we also didn't want to highlight that we were preventing this choice, so we aimed to reduce the likelihood of players trying it. The bulletproof glass here buys time for dialogue between Alyx and Mossman, during which it becomes clear that Alyx doesn't think shooting Mossman is the right thing to do.
Mossman and Eli. This choreo scene required significant iteration. We wanted to deliver a plot twist in the middle of the scene while keeping player control unrestricted. It required a delicate balance to make that twist clear, yet still make sure that it was uninterruptible. If players followed Alyx to the console, they needed to understand what was happening when they turned around. If they stayed back and watched Mossman, they needed to understand what was happening without feeling it was something that they should try to prevent. It required extensive tuning and playtesting to get the timing right, but ultimately, we employed a combination of distraction, delivering the crucial moment quickly, and then finally delivering an explanation after the event.
I'm sorry, Alyx. It's the only... No!